At the beginning of this story, we see a boy reading a book about a wizard who is facing a demon king, and while he is reading, a blonde girl listens to the story next to him. So after finishing reading, the boy admired the character of the brave wizard who challenged the villain and wished to one day become a wizard of justice too. Years later, in the Elzano Empire, we see a magic academy where a girl named Rumia was standing on a sidewalk when she saw a man with an injured finger. She approached him and asked permission to heal him. After using her magic to treat the injury, the man praised her skills. Rumia asked him not to tell anyone, since the use of magic outside the academy was forbidden. Soon after, her friend Sistine arrived waving happily, and the two walked together to school. On the way, Sistine mentioned that the old teacher Rui had suddenly resigned, and Rumia said that a substitute teacher would be teaching that day. While they were talking, a young man ran up, completely disheveled. Seeing him approaching, Sistine used her wind power and threw him into the air, making him fall into the fountain in the square. When she thought she had overdone it, he came out of the water with a silly smile on his face and said that they shouldn't walk around crowded places. Rumia asked Sistine to apologize for hitting him. After apologizing, the boy became convinced and said that it was their fault. He approached Rumia and started looking at her body and hair, which made Sistine angry and threw him back into the fountain before leaving with her friend. Meanwhile, Professor Harry was arguing with the principal in the administration office. He was outraged by the new substitute teacher's tardiness and thought it was absurd that someone with no known history would be hired to teach. At the same time, Sistine and Rumia were already in the classroom. Waiting, Sistine noticed that the new teacher was more than half an hour late. When he finally entered, the two were shocked to see that it was the same young man from the square. He pretended not to know them and introduced himself as Glenn Reeds, the new professor. Glenn began to talk about his hobbies and abilities, until Sistine interrupted him and asked him to get the lesson started. Meanwhile, the headmaster read the new professor's dossier and explained to Harry that Glenn had been recommended by experienced masters of magic, although he was considered only a mediocre third-rate wizard. Harry found this unacceptable and doubted that Glenn could teach such talented students. In class, Glenn wrote on the board that the class would be free study and went to sleep on the table. Sistine became furious and threw a book at him. Harry was even more outraged when he learned that Glenn did not even have a license to teach. The headmaster revealed that he had studied at the academy until he was 15. Celica, a blonde girl, entered the room at that moment and interrupted the discussion, saying that she would not accept anyone speaking ill of Glenn and threatened to use her powers. Harry left to apologize, and Celica stated that she would take full responsibility for Glenn, saying that she only wanted him to have a full life. Back in the classroom, Glenn began to teach the class under duress after being beaten by Sistine. The students found his relaxed behavior strange. Sistine could not understand his handwriting on the board and thought it was absurd that he was a teacher. When a student asked him to translate a spell into common language, he replied that he did not know how either and told her to look it up on her own. Sistine said it was his responsibility to find the answer and bring it to the next class. Glenn asked if it wouldn't be quicker for the student to look for it herself, and then left the room as soon as the bell rang, leaving the students confused. Later, Sistine was outraged by his behavior. Rumia mentioned that the next class would be in the chemistry lab. Suddenly, Glenn mistakenly entered the girls' locker room, thinking it was the principal's office. When he realized his mistake, he closed his eyes and tried to justify himself before getting beaten by the girls. He even looked up on purpose before he was beaten, saying it was unfair to be punished for an accident. Afterwards, Sistine sat alone watching the sky and feeling frustrated after the chemistry class was cancelled. Rumia approached with lunch and asked if his desire to study was linked to a promise he made to his grandfather about discovering the secrets of the Sky Fortress Melgalius. Glenn appeared and sat at the table with them. Sistine chose to remain silent while Rumia talked to Glenn about food. Rumia asked if what Sistine was eating had anything to do with her promise to her grandfather. Sistine replied that she ate little so as not to get sleepy, but since her next class would be with Glenn, she wouldn't mind eating more. Glenn asked her to be direct if she wanted to say something. Sistine stood up, and before she could speak, Glenn offered her some of his food. She was embarrassed. Before she could answer, he took something from her plate. Sistine became furious and asked if he really thought he was a teacher. Glenn replied that it was only temporary. At that moment, Celica remembered the day she offered Glenn the position of interim teacher at the Zano Magic Academy until they found another one. Glenn refused, saying that he was not capable of teaching. Celica said that he had no right to refuse and threatened to use magic against him. Glenn knelt down and asked him to reconsider. She attacked him with a blast of fire, which he barely managed to dodge. In the next class, Glenn went back to telling the students to study on their own and fell asleep again. Sistine stood up and said that she was from a noble family of magic and that she could send him away. Glenn asked her to really do it, happy to be able to get rid of the position. Sistine was shocked and threw the glove at him, challenging him to a magical duel. Rumia was surprised and asked her to apologize, while the other students cheered. Glenn asked what Sistine wanted from the duel. She said that she wanted him to behave like a real teacher. Glenn replied that if he won, she would have to fulfill any request he made. When Glenn looked at Sistine, he remembered a woman he had met in the past who had the same physical characteristics as her. Glenn picked up the glove that was on the ground and said that he accepted the challenge. Late that afternoon, after classes, Glenn stood in the courtyard of the academy in front of Sistine, while his classmates watched attentively. Glenn explained the rules of the duel, saying that only the shockwave spell could be used, and Sistine agreed to the condition. Some students thought he was not taking it seriously, but another explained that this spell was universal, could be used in any situation, and was part of the primitive foundations that every magician learns. Victory would go to whoever could reduce the invocation of the spell to a single line and recite it quickly. Sistine was a little nervous, but she tried to remain calm and decided that she would not allow Glenn to continue doing whatever he wanted. She attacked first with the spell and, to everyone's surprise, hit Glenn with ease. He didn't even try to dodge and was defeated in less than 5 seconds. Sistine was confused, thinking she had misunderstood the rules, but Glenn stood up and said he would let her win the first round, since it would be a best-of-3 match. When Glenn tried to counterattack using the same spell, Sistine hit him again before he could finish the invocation. Glenn then changed his mind and said it would be best of 5. Glenn tried to distract her to buy time and finish the spell, but Sistine hit him again. She concluded that he probably couldn't recite the spell in one line. Glenn replied that reducing the invocation was heresy, denying that he said so because he couldn't do it. Sistine declared that she had won and demanded that he fulfill the agreement. Glenn refused, stating that he had never promised anything. Sistine and Rumia were surprised by the break of the promise. Glenn said he would let it go and that he would consider it a close victory for her, but assured her that she would not win next time. After that, he left the courtyard while everyone was stunned, and Sistine was frustrated and angry at the same time. Days later, Sistine showed dissatisfaction with Glenn for breaking the duel agreement and continuing with the same lazy behavior. When student Lin approached to ask about a spell, Sistine interrupted her and asked her not to ask him anything, since he did not understand the value and greatness of magic. Sistine offered to explain the part that she had not understood. Glenn, disinterested, asked if magic was really that important. Sistine responded sarcastically and explained that magic is, in essence, the study of the laws of the world. She said that magic reveals the origin, structure, and rules that govern the world, and tries to answer why humans exist. Glenn questioned how studying the laws of the world would bring practical benefits, and that other fields, such as medicine, engineering, and agriculture, seemed more useful to humanity. Sistine was very angry, but tried to keep her composure and said that magic is not only useful for practical purposes, but for seeking the truth about the world and about people. Glenn approached and said that magic was extremely useful for killing people, and that nothing was more efficient in that sense. Sistine was deeply shaken by this distorted and aggressive vision, and when she could take it no longer, she walked over and slapped Glenn across the face in front of the class before leaving the room in tears. Afterward, Glenn was left alone to reflect on what made magic so special. He decided to quit his job and went to Celica to apologize and convince her to release him from his position. On the way, he saw Rumia in the lab forming a magic circle on the floor. She explained that she wanted to review the creation of magic circles. Glenn told her that she needed to use mercury. He took one of the vials and poured the liquid around the circle. Then he asked her to try to activate the circle without using shorthand incantations. Rumia managed to activate the circle, and Glenn, seeing her delighted reaction, commented that anyone could do that. He remembered himself as a child and also amazed by magic. As they left the lab, Rumia asked him if he had enjoyed the experience, and he said he hated magic. When she asked what he did before becoming a professor, Glenn replied replied that he was a lonely loser who had been dependent on Celica for the past year. When Rumia tried to learn more about his past, he changed the subject and asked why she was so interested in magic. Rumia said that she wanted to make magic useful to humanity and that she felt she owed it to the Wizard of Justice, who had saved her life 3 years earlier when evil wizards had nearly killed her. The hero's actions had inspired her to learn magic. Glenn almost asked her something, but decided against it and kept walking. Before they said goodbye, Rumia asked him to apologize to Sistine for his hurtful words, because Sistine still felt a connection to her grandfather through magic. Meanwhile, Sistine was in her room, remembering the last moments with her grandfather before his death. She thought about his wish to reach the Sky Castle before he died, and the promise he made to become a witch and fulfill the dream he had failed to achieve. The next day, Glenn surprised the class, including Sistine, by bowing before her and apologizing for what he had said about magic. He admitted that he had exaggerated, even though he still hated magic. Before class began, he told the students that they were all fools, for they had entered the academy without knowing anything about magic. One student mocked Glenn, saying that he was a third-rate wizard who could not cast a simple spell like Shockwave. Glenn decided to explain. He recited the spell in its long form and then wrote it on the board. He then asked what would happen if the spell were divided into 4 parts instead of 3. Glenn explained that the spell would change direction and proved it with a demonstration. The students were amazed when the electrical discharge actually turned sideways. He continued his explanation, showing what happened when the spell was recited in different ways, and said that the students should master these variations in order to truly learn magic. Glenn stated that magic was, in fact, a study of the human mind and an advanced form of self-induction. He looked at Sistine and told her that he had fallen in love with her at first sight. Her face turned red with embarrassment. Glenn then explained to the students that words have an effect on the mind, each in its own way. Sistine was irritated that he had used her as an example and hit him on the head with a book. Nevertheless, Glenn continued his explanation and showed that he could activate the spell with the least possible chance. He explained that magic shapes the subconscious according to the words used, and that reference books alone would not be enough for someone who wanted to become a true wizard. Glenn stated that he would teach the real fundamentals to anyone who was willing to learn. Meanwhile, Celica was happily in the principal's office, who praised Glenn for having become so popular with the students that other students stopped to watch his classes. Harry was annoyed, but Celica proudly said that she had taught Glenn from the beginning. At the end of the day, Glenn looked up at the sky and thought about his future as a teacher. Celica approached him, pleased with his progress, and asked him to give extra lessons, since the class was late because of him. Rumia and Sistine interrupted to ask questions about the content. Glenn was proud of the attention he was getting, but Sistine said that he was the last person she wanted to ask anything. Later, at home, Sistine admitted that Glenn's explanation was amazing, but that he was still an insufferable person. Rumia remembered the times when they didn't get along at first, but now they were best friends. She said she believed Sistine and Glenn would also get along in time. That same night, 2 men were in an alley conspiring about a plan related to the academy. One of them said that the plan would be a success at the meeting the next day. The next day, Glenn ran desperately to the academy, late as usual, but was surprised to find the place completely empty. Without seeing any students or teachers, Glenn saw a person in the back and asked him to show himself. The figure praised his intelligence, despite being a third-rate magician. When Glenn asked who he was, the man replied that it didn't matter, as he would soon kill him and take him to the other world. He then launched a magical attack against Glenn, while the students waited for his arrival in the classroom. Sistine thought about Glenn's sudden growth in popularity at the academy, but the students were surprised when 2 mysterious men entered the classroom saying that they were there in Glenn's place, who would be busy. Sistine warned them that strangers were not allowed in the academy's rooms. One of the men used a magical ability against her, not with the intention of hitting her, but to silence her. Sistine was shocked to realize that he had used military-grade magic. Soon after, he announced that they were looking for Rumia, who remained silent, frightened. The man then walked among the students, asking where Rumia was. Sistine intervened and asked what they intended to do with her. The man called her a tattletale, and as he prepared to attack her again, Rumia revealed herself. The man then approached Rumia saying that he would start eliminating people at random until she appeared, when he demanded that she come with them. Sistine tried to stop him, but Rumia said that she was sure that Glenn would come to save them. The man replied that they had already gotten rid of Glenn before. Rumia asked what they wanted with her, and the man man replied that she should not be alive, calling her Armiana, her real name. One of the intruders took Sistine to a laboratory, where he tied her up, showing evil intentions. Sistine said that she was the daughter of a noble family, but he ignored him and approached her. Holding her tied hands, Sistine tried to maintain a firm stance, but when he began to remove her clothes, she begged him to stop. At that moment, the two were surprised by Glenn's sudden entrance into the laboratory. When Glenn saw the scene, he pretended to be confused and apologized, as if he were interrupting something normal. Sistine, however, asked for help. Glenn then approached and declared that what the man was doing was a crime. The intruder pointed at Glenn, ready to attack him. Sistine begged Glenn to run away and leave her, but the enemy said it was too late and cast an explosive spell. Glenn was not injured, which left the attacker confused. The attack was repeated several times without effect. Glenn then took out of his pocket a paper called Arcanum Trickster, which nullified any magic in its area of effect, but also prevented Glenn from using magic. The attacker asked if Glenn intended to fight without magic. Glenn advanced and hit him with a strong punch. The enemy tried to fight back, but Glenn beat him until he was motionless on the ground. While Sistine watched in surprise, the attacker asked if Glenn had also defeated Carol. Glenn replied that he had left Carol tied up and naked in the middle of the city. The intruder was shocked to see that someone like Glenn had won with just punches, without using magic. Glenn then said that he could use a legendary magic if he hated losing without spells. He pretended to throw a magic punch, but tricked the enemy with a kick in the air, saying that the trick was what made his punch magical. After defeating the man, Glenn tied him up and began interrogating him. Sistine informed him that the other intruder had taken Rumia. Glenn noticed a mark on the prisoner's shoulder, so he used his bracelet to summon Celica and tell her what had happened. He explained that the intruder belonged to the secret organization Seekers of Divine Wisdom, a group of evil magicians. Glenn asked Celica to request support from the Magic Court and investigate if there were accomplices among the Academy's teachers, as it was impossible for the magical security to have been breached so easily. Celica replied that what he was asking was difficult to do. Glenn insisted, saying that the students were in danger. Celica reminded him that she was now just a teacher and had no authority to act directly. Glenn asked her to come there as soon as possible. Celica suspected that the invaders had destroyed the Academy's teleportation circuits and asked him to stay alive until they arrived. Sistine was worried about Rumia and decided to go after her without waiting for help, but Glenn stopped her, saying that it would put her life at risk. Sistine, frustrated, said that he was right when he said that magic was useless, as Rumia could die because of it. Glenn tried to comfort her and said that Rumia wanted to learn magic to make herself useful to people and that he would not allow her to die, promising to save her from those who tried to kidnap her. Before they could continue, the prisoner invaders started laughing uncontrollably and called Glenn a soul thief, just like them. He said that this was a summoning from the leader Rick. Soon, skeletons began to approach. One of them, surprisingly, attacked the invader himself and killed him with a single sword strike. Sistine reinforced her fists with magic, and Glenn destroyed the skeleton with a punch straight to the head. After that, the two escaped from the laboratory. Glenn asked Sistine to perform the large-scale storm skill while he distracted the enemies, threatening to deduct her final grade if she failed to perform it as he had instructed. Glenn then began attacking the structures to buy time. Sistine tried to visualize Glenn and Rumia as sources of power in front of the enemies, molding this image in her subconscious to form the magic. When she finished, Glenn moved away to a safe distance. Sistine launched the storm attack, but was surprised to see that the structures were still standing. Glenn praised her effort and asked her to continue. He then took a red stone from his pocket, activated a spell, and used dark magic to eliminate the structures. He then launched an extinction ray that destroyed part of the academy along with the enemies. After the attack, Glenn fell, his face pale and blood dripping from his mouth. He explained that he had forced his body to cast a spell beyond its limits. Nevertheless, Glenn got up again and said that they needed to escape to another place. At that moment, the leader of the invaders appeared, amazed that a third-rate mage had used an extinction ray and defeated his allies. Glenn saw several magic swords surrounding the leader and told Sistine that she could neutralize them with a nullification spell. Sistine doubted her own ability, as she had spent almost all of her energy. Realizing this, Glenn pushed Sistine and threw her towards the trees, leaving him alone before the enemy. He explained that he could use the spell from the trickster world to cancel magic, but that he could not undo already active magic. The enemy began to attack him with their swords and managed to seriously wound him in the chest. Glenn tried to think of a way to face face those magical swords and tried to use a spell, but the enemy cancelled it before it could activate. The leader mocked his slowness in reciting and used the spell instead. Glenn then counterattacked with a spear of light, but the enemy managed to dodge it at the last moment and recognized Glenn's intelligence. He said that he would have to choose between two quick deaths. Glenn replied that he was only a temporary mage. The enemy attacked again with his swords, piercing Glenn's body just as he recited the nullification spell. The enemy claimed that Glenn would not have enough power to activate the magic, but was surprised by Sistine, who returned and used the nullification spell to neutralize the swords. Glenn then grabbed one of the swords and ran towards the leader. When the enemy tried to reactivate the swords, Glenn used the Trickster Arcanum to cancel all magic around him and pierced the leader's body with the sword, defeating him. When Sistine approached, Glenn was surprised that she had understood why he had pushed her before and admitted that he was 70% sure that she would not understand. As they walked, Sistine warned him that he would not be able to fight in that state. Glenn fell in pain and Sistine held his hand, trying to heal his wounds. At that moment, Glenn remembered when he wanted to become a justice mage and had visions of his past before he lost consciousness. Sometime later, Glenn woke up and saw Sistine sleeping next to him. Celica called and reported that the teleportation circuits were closed and that the Academy's magical barrier had been activated to prevent escape. She asked where the other invaders were. Glenn stood up and said that the circuits were not closed, but were being rewritten to allow the enemies to escape. He asked where the nearest circuit was, and Celica replied that it would take half a day to reach it. Glenn then said that that time had already passed. Glenn looked at Sistine and thanked her for being by his side and for helping him. Meanwhile, Rumia was trapped in the Academy Tower and was surprised when Glenn invaded the place. There was the person responsible for everything that had happened up until that moment. The mastermind of the plot interrupted Glenn and said that he had managed to execute his plan. There were 10 minutes left until the teleportation circuit was rewritten. Rumia would be transferred to the organization, and he would let his magical power consume his own soul to generate a force of nature and blow up the entire academy. Glenn was shocked when he heard Rumia call Rui, asking him to stop it. Rui explained that he was a human bomb, infiltrated in the academy years before, waiting for the right moment. He gave Glenn the choice between deactivating the circuit or waiting for the explosion, reminding him that either way Glenn would have no way of defeating him. Rui then took off his gloves, bit his own arm until it bled, and used the blood to write on the transition circle, trying to deactivate it. But Hugh explained that he had only managed to separate one of the 5 layers of the circle. Glenn repeated the same process for each layer, but Rumia tried to stop him, warning him that he would die if he continued using magic without stopping. Glenn said that he had always wanted to become a justice mage, and that he did not care if he died at that moment, refusing to run away or give up. When he reached the last layer of the circle, he began to cough up blood until he lost his strength, and continued to crawl towards the center. However, he lost consciousness before completing the spell. Rumia then approached, removed her hand from the interference zone of the circle, and used her healing powers to restore him, telling him that he had won by refusing to surrender. Glenn woke up and felt a sudden increase in energy, realizing that Rumia was an amplifier mage, someone capable of intensifying the power of other mages with just a touch. With his strength restored, Glenn was finally able to neutralize the circle and prevent both the transport and the explosion. Hugh recognized that he had already lost and wondered whether he should die following the organization's orders or disobeying them. Glenn approached him and told him that he would pay for his crimes, then clenched his fist and hit him hard. Some time later, Sistine reached the top of the tower where they were staying and found Hugh lying on the ground, with Glenn in Rumia's arms. Glenn gestured for her to be quiet, so as not to wake him. A few days after the incident, Glenn was thinking about the fact that Rumia was actually Princess Armiana, who had supposedly died of an illness 3 years earlier. Celica explained that no one knew about this except her and the headmaster. She then asked why Glenn had decided to continue as a teacher at the academy, even after he had initially refused the position. Upon seeing Rumia and Sistine waving to him from below, Glenn said that he had decided to stay to see what they could achieve, and also to waste some time. A few days after the invaders' attack, the commander of the Imperial Guard, Zelius, visited Queen Alicia's room to discuss her visit to the Alzano Magic Academy. Zelius said that he would be responsible for her protection during her stay. Just as he was about to comment on Princess Armiana's presence at the academy, the queen interrupted him and said that she already knew. She pointed out that after 3 years, Armiana probably hated her, but that it didn't matter if she was living a peaceful and quiet life. Meanwhile, Glenn went to the principal's office and begged for an advance or allowance, as he was broke and starving. Celica replied that he was reaping what he had sown with his negligence and laziness at the beginning of the school year, which he disputed. The principal then suggested that he could receive a special bonus if his class entered a magic competition the following week and won. Glenn thought this was an interesting idea. At the time, Sistine and Rumia were trying to recruit students for the competition, but no one wanted to participate, as they felt they had no chance of winning. Suddenly, Glenn confidently walked into the room and said that he could convince the students to compete. Sistine was frustrated, thinking that he would only make things worse. Glenn then took the list of participants and stated that he would make them win every match. He assigned the combat tasks, explaining that the fights with the highest points would be completed by Sistine, Jibble, and Cash, while Rumia would participate in the mental defense tests. Student Wendy objected to being assigned to decipher symbols. Glenn justified it by saying that she was clumsy and slow, but she knew the spells and could earn a lot of points by deciphering them quickly. Convincing her with this, Sistine noticed that Glenn was watching the students closely and had assigned them tasks based on their abilities and temperaments. She recognized that, despite his appearance of clumsiness and laziness, he demonstrated qualities as a teacher. Sistine then stood up and suggested that only the best students should cover all the events, as the other departments did. Glenn disagreed and said that it would be better for everyone to participate in order to gain experience. Still, he felt insecure about having rejected Sistine's idea and supported Jibble. After leaving the room, Glenn reflected on the fact that the other departments would only use the best students. Looking out the window, he saw some students fighting in the gym courtyard. He went over to calm the situation, but Professor Harry appeared, stood in front of Glenn, and asked if his class was also practicing for the competition. Harry confidently stated that they had no choice but to win as long as he was ahead of them, and asked Glenn and his students to clear the space. Harry then asked if Glenn really intended to enter all of his class's students into the competition, and called his students a hindrance to the other departments because of their low level. Glenn warned him not to underestimate his students, as he might be surprised by their defeat. Glenn then challenged Harry, betting 3 months' salary on his class's victory. He soon realized that he had exaggerated and that this could lead to his ruin. Harry accepted the challenge, also betting 3 months' salary on his own students. Glenn thought about giving up on the bet, but Sistine interrupted the argument and told Harry that he had no right to claim the training area, threatening to take the case to the Academy's authorities. She promised that they would do everything possible to win the competition. Harry left with his students, promising that he would make them regret having provoked him. Sistine motivated his classmates to do their best, and Glenn spent the next few days training the students, teaching them spells and skills, doing research and reviewing books with them. On the eve of the competition, Rumia was in her room and took a necklace out of her pocket. When she touched it, she remembered moments in the past when she was surrounded by corpses, and the Justice Wizard appeared to calm her, saying that he would be by her side and protect her. His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Sistine, who announced that dinner was ready and asked what Rumia was hiding behind her back. Rumia changed the subject, saying that the competition would start the next day and that they would have to do their best in the presence of the Queen. The next day, Queen Alicia was on her way to Alzano. Her maid commented that she seemed excited to be going to see her daughter Armiana. The maid then gave her a new necklace with blue pendants to wear. When the Queen arrived at the Empire, she declared the start of the magical competition, to applause. Glenn felt his stomach empty as he clapped. Hungry, Rumia noticed that his mother was not wearing the necklace with the picture of the two of them and was a little disappointed. Glenn's students had gotten 3rd place in the first match. This excited the others, who believed that they could do well if they followed the teacher's instructions. However, a student from Harry's class, named Craze, showed up and said that they were lucky to get 3rd. Harry approached and sarcastically commented that this would be a good memory. Glenn's students replied that they would win and not let the other class surpass them, although Glenn was worried. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, Celica enjoyed the fight alongside Alicia. She asked if Glenn really impressed. Alicia replied that he was just an ordinary man, but that he always did something unexpected. Backstage, a guard whispered something in Zelia's ear. The students in Glenn's class continued to do well in the other battles, which impressed him. Glenn thought he would secure the bonus until the mental defense test came. A student from another department, named Gale, warned Rumia that she should give up, as he couldn't tolerate her. Rumia replied that she would try to score as high as her classmates to make her department reach second place. Glenn and Sistine watched the fight from the stands, accompanied by Jebel, who criticized Glenn for putting Rumia in that test, saying that she was being used as a scapegoat. Glenn replied that Rumia would perform well thanks to her emotional stability. Count Zess stood before the students as a judge and announced that he would start with the sleep skill. The students cast spells to block the hypnosis, and Rumia advanced to the next round. In the second round, Zess used her mind warping ability. One of the students couldn't resist and was eliminated. Rumia managed to resist until the end, leaving only her and Gale, the previous year's champion. Zess decided to use the mind-breaking ability, one of the most dangerous spells, which causes loss of consciousness. After casting it, she was surprised to see that both resisted. Gale showed admiration for Rumia's resistance and asked why she didn't give up. Rumia replied that she couldn't lose, because Glenn had said that they would all win together, and that they were fighting for a common goal. Gale called Glenn a foolish teacher and asked if he was the head of her department. Rumia said that he was a fun teacher. Zess then increased the power of the spell to end the competition. When she mastered the spell, Rumia fell to her knees. Zess asked her if she wanted to give up. Rumia almost said that she would resist, but Glenn interrupted the test and declared her withdrawal. Rumia was surprised by the decision and wanted to continue, but Glenn held her back and told her that she had done a good job, even though she was facing the wrong opponent. Sistine joined them and said that there was no need to continue if she was suffering. Rumia stated that she enjoyed the battle and felt that she could fight for everyone. The narrator went to interview Gale, but was shocked to see him unconscious. This meant that Rumia had won the mental defense test, even though she had withdrawn after withstanding the test. When the announcement of the victory was made, Sistine hugged Rumia and celebrated with her. Alicia, watching from afar, was happy to see Rumia smiling and surrounded by good friends. Celica suggested that she go talk to her daughter, but Alicia said that the fact that she had abandoned her would not change her, no matter what happened. Meanwhile, Glenn was among his students celebrating the victory. From afar, a young man and a girl watched the scene attentively. Glenn and his class were already in second place in the competition. They continued to participate in the next matches, and Glenn's face showed fatigue from the intense pace. The two observers, Albert and Rel, recognized Glenn. Rel wanted to go talk to him, but Albert stopped her, reminding her that they had a mission to complete: to investigate the Imperial Guard after reports of suspicious activity. During lunch break, the students were resting while Glenn, broke and hungry, was walking through the park. During a walk in the park, Lynn approached and asked to switch tests with another student. Glenn asked which one she wanted to compete in, and Lynn replied that she liked transformation magic. Glenn explained that the competition was like a festival and that the most important thing was to have fun. He quickly reviewed the self-deception spell with her, explaining that she could transform into anything as long as she had a fixed image in her mind. Glenn asked what she wanted to transform into, and Lynn replied that she wanted to transform into the time angel Latilica. Glenn suggested that she use a reference book, try her best, and not worry if she lost. After Lynn walked away, Sistine approached her, thinking she was her friend Rumia, and asked if they could have lunch together. Glenn, seeing the food in front of him, tried his best to resist the temptation to trick her into eating it. But Glenn took Sistine's food and tried to convince himself that he wouldn't eat any of it. He feigned surprise at seeing two versions of himself, while Sistine used a spell to cancel the transformation and reveal her true identity. When she realized it was Glenn, she attacked him before he could escape. After that, Glenn was thrown through the air and crashed into the trees as a result of Sistine's attack. He sat on one of the benches, thinking only about food, until Rumia appeared with some snacks. As soon as Glenn saw the food, his eyes lit up with happiness, and he devoured the sandwiches in a hurry. Glenn asked if she had prepared the snacks, and Rumia said that she wasn't a good cook, but that she would keep it a secret from whoever had made the food, since that person had gotten into a fight with the original recipient and missed the chance to deliver it. Rumia preferred not to waste the food. Glenn felt a little frustrated at being a substitute for a trash can, eating something that was no longer valuable to others, but he kept going until he finished it all and thanked Rumia for sharing. At that moment, Queen Alicia appeared and asked to speak with him in private. Glenn didn't realize the queen was talking to him, so he replied that he would be busy after he finished his lunch. However, he and Rumia were surprised to see her up close. Meanwhile, Celes was searching for her after noticing her disappearance and asked one of the guards to locate her. Elsewhere, Celica was mocking the Imperial guards' concern for the queen after managing to hide her with magic. Then Eleanor, the queen's maid, approached Celica and asked to discuss some matters in Alicia's absence. She whispered that she had placed a cursed necklace around the queen's neck, activated so that she would sacrifice her own life in the name of the Seekers of Divine Wisdom's mission. Celica was surprised to realize that Eleanor was part of the organization. Meanwhile, Glenn was kneeling before Queen Alicia, who asked him to stand up, as she wanted to apologize for having shamefully expelled him from the Mage Corps, despite all his dedication to the Empire. Glenn, embarrassed, said that he had resigned of his own free will because he hated the job. He called himself a failure and asked her not to bow down to someone like him. Glenn then asked why she had come here without servants or guards. Alicia looked at Rumia and called her by her real name, Ermiana, and approached to ask how her life with the Vibble family was. Rumia pretended to be someone else and said that her name was Rumia Tingle and that Ermiana had died a long time ago. Alicia was frustrated by her daughter's reaction and apologized for putting her in that embarrassing situation, then quickly walked away. As she left, Alicia realized that Ermiana would not accept her as she had imagined. Before leaving, she asked Glenn to take care of her. Upon returning, Alicia met Celos on the way, but was surprised to see that the guards surrounded her with their swords raised. Celos said that he would protect her for a while. Meanwhile, Albert was observing the situation through his special ability and saw the guards taking the queen away. Rel suggested that they attack from the front to rescue her. Meanwhile, the students continued to participate in the magic competition and progress, but Glenn was distracted by thoughts of Ermiana's past after seeing her special ability in action. His thoughts were interrupted by Sistine, who asked about Rumia's whereabouts since she had not returned yet. Glenn told her what had happened and said that she probably needed some time alone. He then decided to look for her and asked Sistine to look after the other students until he returned. Rumia was sitting alone, holding the necklace she used to wear to remember her mother, until she was interrupted by Glenn's voice, who noticed that the locket was empty. Glenn said that he already knew the truth about her and her relationship with Alicia. Rumia explained that she knew why her mother had abandoned her, saying that she was a cursed creature, the embodiment of evil, and a risk to the royal family. Therefore, she believed it was necessary for them to have sent her away. Even so, she still felt hurt and could not forgive Alicia. Rumia also said that she felt that she would be betraying the Sistine family, who had taken her in, if she forgave the queen. Glenn shared his view on human beings, saying that everyone gets hurt and regrets the decisions they make. As he spoke to Rumia, he remembered parts of his own past and suggested that she make her decisions based on her true feelings. He then asked her what she really wanted to do. Rumia replied that she did not fully understand what she was feeling. Glenn explained that years ago he had served as a mage in the Imperial Army and that because of his position, he had often seen the queen. Noticing that she always wore a necklace similar to Rumia's, the queen had asked him to accompany her on a visit. Their conversation was interrupted when the Imperial Guard appeared and surrounded Rumia, raising their swords and accusing her of conspiring to assassinate Queen Alicia. They sentenced her to death for treason against the royal family. Glenn stood between Rumia and the guards and demanded proof, stating that she could not be executed without a trial. One of the guards replied that the order came directly from the queen and warned Glenn that if he did not hand over Rumia, he would be executed for treason. Rumia agreed to what the guards demanded and surprised Glenn with her decision. She said that she wanted to go because she felt guilty for having betrayed the queen and asked them to leave Glenn alone. When Glenn tried to speak, one of the guards struck him with the hilt of his sword, knocking him unconscious. Then the guards took Rumia behind a tree. One of them asked her to close her eyes and stay still, so as not to prolong her suffering and die with just one blow. Rumia obeyed, while thinking that she had always waited for this moment and that they would finish her off. She assumed that the queen had come to see her one last time before ordering her death. When Rumia opened her eyes and saw Glenn standing there, she became furious and asked why he had saved her. Glenn replied that Sistine would be angry if he abandoned her and that the queen could not eliminate her without a trial. Glenn then picked her up and used his ability to jump to the roof of the tunnel and escape the sight of the guards. Glenn decided to find the queen and considered infiltrating the guards, but then realized that it might not be necessary to confront her directly. He hid in an alley and called Celica for help. However, he was surprised by her response, saying that there was nothing she could say or do. Glenn asked why the Imperial Guard was out of control and why the queen had ordered Rumia's execution. Celica, sitting next to the queen and surrounded by the guards, said that he was the only one capable of changing the situation and asked him to find a way to stand before the queen. After ending the call, Glenn concluded that the situation was more serious than he could handle alone, especially with the guard commander present. At that moment, he was surprised by the arrival of Albert and Rel. Upon seeing him, Rel advanced with his sword and tried to attack him. Glenn and Rumia managed to dodge it. Rel grabbed what was left of the sword stuck in the ground and, upon realizing that it was broken, used her magical ability to summon another one. Glenn tried to stop her using the ice element, but she dodged all of his attacks. Glenn was surprised when Rel and Albert executed a joint attack. However, Albert's blow was aimed at Rel, preventing her from hurting Glenn. Rumia asked who they were, and Glenn replied that they were Albert and Rel, old colleagues from when he served in the Imperial Army. Albert approached and said that the Imperial Guard had surrounded the Queen and Celica with the aim of eliminating Princess Armiana. Glenn questioned why they were after Rumia of all times. Albert explained that he had a plan to infiltrate the guards. Rel suggested attacking from the front, but Glenn disagreed and told him what Celica had told him, stating that he would bet on her for now. Meanwhile, the magical competition continued, and Glenn's students were disheartened that they were falling behind without him. Albert and Rel appeared before the students dressed in official attire and said that they were friends of Glenn. They said that, at his request, they would temporarily take over the leadership of the class, since he was busy with an urgent matter. Sistine decided to trust them and asked them to lead the class to victory. She encouraged her classmates to win in Glenn's absence so that he would not mock them if they lost. Meanwhile, Harry believed that his chances of winning had increased with Glenn's absence. In order to ensure victory for his students, they needed to win the next round. When the transformation fight began, one of Harry's students, Sita, transformed into a huge red dragon and achieved a high score in front of Lynn, who was terrified at the possibility of losing. Albert approached Lynn and tried to encourage her using the same words that Glenn had said before. Lynn entered the arena, closed her eyes in concentration, and managed to transform into Latilica, the Angel of Time, scoring more points than Sita. Harry was furious that his students had lost the round. As time passed, Glenn's class reached first place in total points. Only the final battle remained to decide the winning department. Meanwhile, Glenn ran across the rooftops with Rumia in his arms. Silos was amazed that the guards could not handle a single mage, and ordered them to find the princess and eliminate her. At the same time, the decisive fight involving Sistine began. Since the two departments were tied, it was up to her to decide the outcome. Sistine faced Heinkel, who attacked her with a wall of fire. She stood up and remembered the trust of Albert and Rel, as well as the support of her classmates. Then she used the Windstorm ability to throw Heinkel off the arena and win the fight, securing her department's victory in that year's competition. All of her classmates gathered around her to celebrate. Meanwhile, Glenn and Rumia continued to run away until they were cornered in an alley. The award ceremony for the magic competition began, and Albert and Rel went up on stage to receive their medals. They approached the queen, and Celica realized that this was Glenn's plan to break through the guard's siege. Zelos and the others were shocked to see that the people before the queen were Glenn and Rumia, who had undone the disguise spell. Zelos ordered the guards to attack them, but Celica formed a massive barrier, preventing them from approaching. With Glenn, Rumia, Celica, Silos, and the queen separated from the others, Glenn accused Silos of using the queen's name to try to eliminate Rumia and asked Alicia to order an end to the violence. Silos declared that he would take his own life after all, stating that the queen, as the pillar of the empire, needed to be protected at all costs. Glenn and Rumia were surprised when the queen ordered Silos to place the sword to Rumia's neck. Rumia was shocked by Alicia's harsh words, who said that she hated her and regretted having given birth to her. Silos raised his sword towards Rumia. Glenn found the queen's attitude and Celica's silence strange. When he looked at Alicia, he he suspected that she was acting against her will. Glenn remembered Celica's words, saying that only he could change this situation. Glenn then asked about the necklace the queen was wearing and if she wanted to remove it. Alicia denied wanting to take it off. At that moment, Glenn ran to her. Silos attacked him and knocked him down. When Silos tried to strike him, Alicia ripped off the necklace and threw it away. Glenn seized the opportunity and kicked Silos, pushing him away. Then the necklace shattered before Glenn's eyes. He realized that the necklace was an activated curse spell that ended with the death of whoever wore it. When Silos asked why the curse had not been activated, Glenn took the Trickster Arcanum from his pocket and said that it had nullified all magic within the confines where they were. Then Glenn asked the queen to stop lying, showing the broken necklace, and Alicia ran to Rumia, hugged her and asked for forgiveness. As soon as the barrier around them was undone, the guards approached the queen to ensure her safety, while everyone around watched in surprise. Albert and Rel cornered Elena in an alley and demanded that she explain why she was trying to eliminate Princess Armiana. Elena used the Akashic Records ability to escape before Rel could attack and capture her. Afterward, the two returned to Glenn and told him who was behind the events. Glenn suspected that there were more members of the secret organization in hiding, so Albert and Rel decided to act immediately. Before leaving, Rel told Glenn that they would settle the score next time. That night, Celica met the queen before the match. Alicia asked her to take care of Rumia and said that she was pleased to see her daughter thank her, even if it was just a little. Meanwhile, Rumia told Glenn about what happened between her and her mother and said that she was happy that she was able to open up. She then asked Glenn how he knew that she was lying when she said that she hated her. Glenn replied that 3 years ago, when she was kidnapped, the queen had begged him to find her, crying so hard that it was impossible for those feelings to be fake. After that, Glenn decided to join the celebration with the students, celebrating their victory and distributing gifts as a reward, as he had received a bonus and 3 monthly salaries. However, he was shocked to see the students drunk after eating several yeast cakes and was even more surprised when the restaurant owner handed him the bill, which was exactly the same amount as the bonus and the 3 monthly salaries he had received. A few days later, Glenn was training Sistine in a forest at night. Sistine asked if they were practicing hand-to-hand combat. Glenn explained that it would help her improve her sense of attack and defense in magical combat, and said that he would teach her military magic once she mastered close combat. When he realized that she was afraid of learning martial arts, he told her that she would need strength to protect Rome if necessary, and that it would prevent her from being affected by the dark side of magic. Sistine felt motivated and asked him to continue encouraging her. The next day, on their way to the academy, Sistine and Rumia found Glenn sitting on the edge of the fountain, feeling sleepy. They both thought that he had been up all night worrying about Rumia, but Glenn denied it. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden attack from behind by Reel, but Glenn managed to grab her sword at the last moment and asked if she was trying to kill him. Reel replied that it was a greeting, as Albert had told her to do that whenever she met an old comrade. Sistine remembered that she was the same girl who had led her division in the magic competition, along with Albert. When they noticed that Reel was wearing the academy uniform, Glenn understood that the Empire had appointed her as Rome's official guardian, disguised as a new student. They were even more surprised when Reel expressed her desire to protect Glenn instead of Rumia. Glenn asked her not to say anything strange and ordered her not to reveal her true identity to anyone under any circumstances. After that, everyone headed to the academy, and Glenn introduced Reel to the other students as a new student. When asked to introduce herself, Reel almost revealed who she really was, but Glenn interrupted her and whispered what she should say. When one of the students asked about what kind of relationship she had with Glenn, she answered unexpectedly, making everyone think that they were in a romantic relationship. During the training, Reel stood in front of the target and tried to use the shockwave spell, but failed several times. Sistine wondered if she had really served in the Imperial Army with such performance. Glenn approached her and asked if there was a problem. Reel wanted to know if she needed to use the shock beam during this training. Glenn explained that it was the only spell allowed for ranged attacks between students, but he said that she didn't need to use it and reminded her that military magic was forbidden. Reel then summoned her huge sword with magic, threw it with force at the target, and managed to hit it perfectly, leaving all her classmates impressed. Glenn realized that she had become the most dangerous person in the department. Later, Reel, Sistine, and Rumia went to the academy cafeteria together. When the other students saw her eating, they were amazed that such a small girl could wield a giant sword and destroy a training target with such force. Meanwhile, Glenn was in the library talking to Celica about the army's decision to assign Real to protect Rumia. Glenn said that he hoped that Real would learn to adapt to living with others during her stay at the academy. Soon after, the students set off on an excursion under Glenn's supervision to the island of Senaria to take a break from their studies and enjoy the beach and warm sea. When they arrived at the island's port, some students stopped in front of a shop where a salesman was trying to sell his wares, but Glenn asked them to ignore him and said that he had already been discovered and that there was no longer any point in disguising himself. Albert then took off his cloak and revealed that he was the real guard responsible for protecting and watching over Rumia from a distance, while Real's presence near her was merely a distraction. When Glenn asked why he wanted to talk, Albert replied that it was so that he could keep an eye on Real, as they both knew how dangerous she could be. Meanwhile, Real remained constantly by Rumia and Sistine's side. Afterward, they all went on a boat trip, but Glenn suffered from seasickness and could barely stand up when they reached the island. Sistine suggested that they go somewhere else, but Glenn insisted on going there. Rumia suspected that he wanted to distract them from the military magic in the chemistry lab, but Glenn replied that he just wanted to see the students in their swimsuits. Later, Glenn lay down on the sand to rest, while the others played and swam on the shore. He saw Gibble sitting alone, reading a book, and asked why he was so serious. Gibble replied that he hadn't come there to play. Their conversation was interrupted by Sistine, Rumia, and Real, who invited them to play volleyball. Gibble joined the game with another student against Sistine and Real, and they continued playing until late afternoon. That night, the boys planned to invade the girls' dormitory, but Glenn stopped them. Since they wouldn't give up, they decided to attack him to clear a path and started a fight outside, while Real, Sistine, and Rumia watched from the balcony. Real commented that she had never seen Glenn having such fun, as he used to be more sad in the past, and so she decided to stay by his side to protect him. The other girls interrupted their conversation and invited everyone to play inside the dormitory. Rumia and Sistine were relieved to see Real join the others. After that, Glenn sat alone on the beach. Later, he noticed that Real, Rumia, and Sistine were nearby, watching the stars and meteors. That was the moment when Real understood, for the first time, what friendship was. They continued playing in the water together, while Glenn sat under a tree, watching everything attentively. During the early morning, with everyone asleep, Glenn noticed that Real was still awake. She approached him and asked why he had left in the past. Glenn replied that he regretted it, and Real said that she didn't know what to do with her life without him. Glenn commented that she seemed to have had fun with Sistine and Rumia earlier, and that she could live like a normal student at the academy. Real replied that she only lived because of him. Glenn said that wasn't true, and that her brother wanted her to pursue her own happiness. Real then asked what was wrong with thinking that way and fighting to protect him. She then ran off after saying that she hated Sistine and Rumia for taking Glenn away from her. Glenn reflected that no matter how hard he tried, things never turned out the way he wanted them to. The next morning, the students began their journey towards the research lab. Real was distracted while Sistine and Rumia talked to her, until she tripped. When they tried to help her, Real responded by saying that she hated them and didn't want them to get close to her. Rumia asked why she hated being with them. Glenn explained that Real was a bit shaken by something he had said the day before, and that it wasn't their fault. When they arrived at the research lab, they were greeted by the lab's director, Parks Blumen. The students relaxed in the garden while Real stayed away. Parks then gave them a tour of the lab and explained that the lab combined chemistry with white magic in its projects. They visited the research specimen room and saw various animals and plants used in experiments to create chimerical creatures. Rumia questioned whether it was right to manipulate the lives of other creatures. Sistine agreed, saying that overdoing such research could turn someone into an evil sorcerer. When Rumia brought up the history of the research, Parks interrupted the conversation and complimented Sistine on her historical knowledge. Glenn interrupted and explained that the lab's resurrection project involved creating a body based on chemistry, using a person's genetic code, an astral code, and a transformative ether. Parks said the idea was to combine clones to create a copy of the person from a short time ago. Glenn then commented that this type of research had been abandoned because it required the death of several people to bring one back to life, which was unacceptable. Parks agreed with Glenn and said that, in the end, they were only human and had no right to decide who lives or who dies. Parks told her that there were rumors that the secret organization had stolen the research project and managed to successfully implement it. Curious, Sistine asked what would be needed to complete the reanimation project. Parks replied that, in addition to the 3 elements, original magic would be needed, although the chance of that happening was extremely low, since the project required something that would make the impossible possible. During the night, Rumia continued to observe Rel from afar. Since Rel had been isolated from everyone all day, Sistine tried to approach her and invited Rel to have lunch with them near the laboratory, but Rel refused and left in front of them. Glenn approached Rel and told her that she needed to stop crying. Rel pushed her hand away and ran away, beginning to believe that Sistine and Rumia had taken Glenn from her. She ran to the beach and cried alone. Meanwhile, Glenn explained to Sistine and Rumia that, despite her appearance, Rel was still a child and asked them to be patient with her behavior. Rumia stated that she would never hate Rel for any reason, and Sistine decided to go after her. Glenn said that he would do it himself as her teacher. Rel continued to cry until she was surprised by the appearance of her brother, who was by her side. From afar, Albert watched and realized that it was a trap set by the secret organization. When he was about to walk away, he realized that he was being followed. It was then that Elena appeared behind the trees. Albert attacked her, but she dodged and stood on a branch. He stated that he knew that they were plotting something with Rumia and promised to eliminate all the members of the organization. The two began to fight using their abilities, setting a large part of the forest on fire. Elena summoned zombie spirits to attack Albert, who responded by summoning lightning to stun the spirits around him. Elena admitted that he was much stronger than she imagined. She then used a special ability to regenerate her own body. Albert realized that she was on a different level than the evil mages he had faced before, and that if he captured her, he would gain an important advantage for the Empire. Meanwhile, Sistine and Rumia were in their room thinking about Rel. Sistine remembered the day they went to the beach together and believed that Rel was not lying about wanting to be their friend. She decided to go shopping before Glenn and Rel returned. Rel was shaken by the presence of her brother, who had been killed by the organization in front of her in the past. But he said that he was still alive at the time and asked for help to free himself from his work with the organization. He said that to do so, he would need Rel to hand over Rumia, overcoming Glenn's protection. Rel was shocked by the request, as it meant betraying Glenn, Sistine, and Rumia. As he tried to convince her, Glenn ran up, asked her to step aside, and stood between her and his brother, taking the magical relic from his pocket. He asked for Rel's help in capturing his brother, but to his surprise, Rel stabbed him in the back. When he turned to her, she said goodbye and pulled the sword from his body, leaving Glenn bleeding heavily. Rel said that from that moment on, she would live for her brother. The fight between Albert and Elena was still going on in the forest when Albert managed to see, through his magic, Glenn lying covered in blood in front of Rel and his brother. Elena fled using her ability, and Albert went back to observe the situation with his magic eye. He saw Rel picking up her sword and quickly heading towards the inn. Sistine returned from the market with plenty of food for Glenn. Upon entering the room, she was shocked to see Rumia lying on the floor, covered in blood, while Rel stood over her with her sword in her hands and her clothes stained. Rel stated that Rumia was still alive. When Sistine asked about Glenn, Rel coldly replied that she had taken his life. Then she said that she was now on the side of the secret organization and would take Rumia with her. Sistine became furious and threatened to attack her if she took one more step. Rel stood up and challenged Sistine to do it. Sistine hesitated, froze, and began to imagine what the future would be like if Rumia and Glenn died, also remembering the past she had with them. When Rel saw that she was not going to react, she picked up Rumia and left the room. Sistine tried to justify to herself that she did not attack so as not to worsen Rumia's condition or cause Rel's death, but she ended up accepting that, in fact, she was afraid and could not do anything. Albert entered the room carrying Glenn on his shoulders. He placed him on the bed and said that he was still alive, but on the verge of death, in urgent need of healing magic. She asked Sistine for help. She cried desperately, holding Glenn's arm, but Albert said that crying would not save his life. She calmed down and asked what needed to be done. Albert explained that they would need to perform a white magic ritual, using the spiritual energy of both of them. He noticed that Glenn had stopped breathing, but still had a weak pulse. He asked Sistine to keep him alive with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation until the ritual began. Then, she cut off her own finger and began drawing spells on the floor of the room. Sistine approached and began to blow air on Glenn. Meanwhile, Rumia woke up in an unknown place, with her hands tied. Rel and her brother appeared and said that they needed her for something important. When she asked about Glenn, she did not immediately understand that her brother had said that Rel killed him. Rumia asked why she did it, and Rel replied that if she had not done it, she would never have understood the true purpose of her life. Then she remembered the first time she met Glenn, when she was lost in a snowstorm. Meanwhile, Glenn Glenn woke up in Rumia and Sistine's room and saw Albert sitting next to the bed. Sistine was sleeping, exhausted. Albert said that Glenn should thank her, because without her the ritual would not have worked. Sistine's spiritual energy had been essential, and now they could count on her in the fight to save Rumia. After explaining the situation, Glenn became angry at Rel's betrayal. Albert said that he had warned him about her and revealed that there were suspicions that the White Chemistry Laboratory received financial support from the secret organization, and that Parks, the director, had direct ties to them. Glenn questioned why he had not told him this before when they met at the island's port, and accused Albert of having used Rumia as bait. He said that he would never forgive him if she got involved further because of this. Albert promised to eliminate Rel if she got in the way and said that he regretted having followed superior orders. Glenn suggested trying to bring her back by correcting the misunderstanding. Albert doubted she would listen to him with her brother around, but Glenn said he would try, even if it was by force. Albert claimed that the real reason for the betrayal was Glenn's abandonment in the past, when he ran away and left his companions. He then punched Glenn and said he forgave him for disappearing. He then handed him a gun and said that the priority was to save Rumia, even if that meant eliminating Rel. Rumia suffered inside the organization's hideout. While Parks celebrated the progress of his project, he said that her participation was an honor, and stated that if she thought the members of the organization were bad, those of the royal family were even worse. Albert and Glenn reached the hideout thanks to a spell that Albert had previously cast on Rumia, allowing them to locate her. He had also cast another spell on Eleanor during the fight. When Eleanor noticed the magic and saw that Glenn and Albert had invaded the hideout, Parks decided to welcome them by sending one of his creatures. A giant four-eyed lion appeared before them, but Albert used fire magic and easily destroyed it. Parks was furious when he realized that they had overcome his monster. Meanwhile, Sistine was still in her room, preparing to leave, when Lynn and her colleague entered, worried, wanting to know about Rumia. Sistine couldn't say anything. Expecting more trouble, Glenn and Albert advanced until they encountered another giant monster that tried to attack them. They retreated, and Albert created a magical barrier, while Glenn cast a spell and defeated the creature with a single blow. Parks was amazed at their strength and couldn't understand how a simple magic teacher could be so powerful. Eleanor then turned to Rel and his brother and said that it was time for Rel to take control. Chadip said, meanwhile, Sistine met with her colleagues at the inn and told them everything that had happened, trying to reassure them by saying that Glenn would take charge of the situation. Even so, her colleagues were divided. One group thought that they should go help her instead of standing idly by, while the other group believed that it was best to trust Glenn to solve everything on his own. Glenn and Albert reached a point where they felt that they were close to the place where Rumia was being held. It was then that they found Park standing in the hallway, as if he had been waiting for them, and he released another monster on the way. Albert asked Glenn to go ahead, as he would be in charge of facing the creature. Glenn ran down the hallway and left the battle to Albert, who was left alone before the monster. Meanwhile, Sistine was still trying to convince her colleagues that the best decision was to trust Glenn. She said that if they all went together, they would end up doing more harm than good, and asked them to trust her judgment. In the end, her colleagues accepted her decision. Elsewhere, Rel and her brother stood in front of the nearly completed device of the project. Rel's brother asked if she could defeat Glenn and Albert, and she replied that it was her life's purpose. He then asked if she had anything to say about putting Rumia's life at risk. Rel simply asked him not to come any closer. Her brother insisted that she eliminate Glenn once more. Rel summoned her sword, and Glenn asked if she really intended to fight. He tried to warn her that the organization was deceiving her and that her brother had been dead for 2 years, and that the dead do not come back to life. Still, she did not believe him. Glenn realized that she was not listening and concluded that the only option was to face her. Rel approached and began to attack him with his sword. Glenn dodged the blows while thinking that it was all his fault for never telling her the truth and for having run away in the past without taking her with him. He tried to make her listen, but Rel kept attacking. Rumia tried to intervene, asking Rel to remember the times they spent together on the beach and saying that she still considered both her and Sistine her friends. Rel hesitated for a moment, touched by the memory, but then her brother asked her if she really loved him. Rel replied that her brother was everything to her and that she had decided to live only for him. When Rel was preparing to attack Glenn once more, he took advantage of the distance between them, drew his gun and shot. Then, he began to provoke her, saying that he wanted to get closer to her brother, and asked what his name was. Rel was surprised by the question and wondered why he wanted to know this now. Glenn said that he would back off if she could could tell him his brother's name. Rel tried to remember, but felt a sharp pain in her head every time she tried to say the name, which worried her. Her brother tried to reassure her, saying that the name didn't matter and that it wouldn't change the fact that he was her brother. Glenn took advantage of the moment of confusion and threw the weapon at her, causing Rel to drop the sword. He ran and immobilized her with a gravity spell. Rel's brother was furious and told Glenn to step away. Glenn then shot the project device behind him, deactivating the effect that was binding Rumia. He then charged at Rel's brother, punched him, and declared him a fraud. At that moment, Rel remembered that his real brother's name was Cheyenne. Cheyenne also began to remember her past with Rel, revealing that she had been one of the victims of the reanimation project. He had created a human clone with the help of a man named Rainer and a girl named Alucia, and decided to name her Rel. Cheyenne, however, was against the continuation of the project and tried to leave the organization, but Rainer surprised him and stabbed him. When Alucia tried to escape, she was also attacked by Rainer. Rel remembered the truth when he heard what Rainer told Glenn. Rainer revealed that Cheyenne had betrayed the organization 2 years earlier and reported their activities to the Imperial Army mages. Glenn explained that he was the mage to whom Cheyenne had reported it and that he remembered Cheyenne's plan to destroy the project. Cheyenne had asked Glenn to save Rainer and Alucia, but after the interview, Glenn lost contact with him and, upon breaking into the laboratory, found him dead, as well as Alucia, who had tried to escape. Therefore, Glenn decided to protect Rel, who had inherited Alucia's astral code and memories. Rainer, on the other hand, believed that he had modified Rel's memories to serve his own interests. He called her trash and said that he no longer needed her. Glenn, enraged, attacked Rainer with a lightning spear, but was stopped by 3 clones of Rel who appeared before him to protect Rainer. Rainer stood up and said that Glenn would not be able to defeat him while the clones were there, as he had removed all their emotions and turned them into puppets. Then he ordered them to attack Glenn. The copies all advanced at the same time, and one of them went towards the original Rel to kill her. Glenn rushed to stop her and managed to push the copy away before it could hit Rel in the head with its sword. Rel was surprised to see that Glenn was protecting her, even after everything. Glenn said that he and the other Academy members didn't see her as a puppet, and that if she really was, she wouldn't have that expression on her face. He told her that she needed to live for something worthwhile, and that she shouldn't get so caught up in her own thoughts. Rel then took her sword and decided to destroy her copies. Rainer was surprised by her attitude and tried to use his magic, but Glenn stopped him with the help of Arcana the trickster. After that, Glenn pointed his gun at Rainer's head and asked Rumia to close her eyes so she wouldn't see what would happen. Rainer panicked and begged not to die, but Glenn pulled the trigger anyway. Rainer soon realized that the gun was unloaded and that Glenn was just bluffing. Glenn said he would never do that and warned him to never touch his students again. Then he gave him one last punch. Meanwhile, Albert was still fighting the monster in the hallway and continued torturing the creature until it turned to ashes. After Glenn saved Rumia, he returned with Rel and Albert. They were greeted by Sistine and the other students. Rel bowed her head before Sistine, who hugged her and started crying. Later, they all went to the island's beach to play volleyball. Glenn and Albert watched from a distance. Albert commented that Sistine looked a lot like Sierra Silvers, and Glenn watched her face intently as she joked with her classmates. Meanwhile, Elinor was talking to the leader of the organization in an unknown location about Rumia and the Resurrection Project, which had failed with Park's defeat. The leader ordered them to observe the situation in silence for now. After the trip to Ceneria, Rel invited Sistine and Rumia to dinner at her family's house. Their parents welcomed Rel warmly. Sistine commented that she was a bit shy, and her mother asked them to take care of the house while she and her father left for the capital the next day. After dinner, the 3 of them sat on the porch. Rel wanted to apologize for what had happened and thanked them for accepting her despite everything. The 2 hugged Rel to comfort her, and she said that she considered them both her best friends. The next day, Sistine found Celica in the Academy library after helping her pick up a book that had fallen on the floor. She read the title, which was about the celestial castle Melgalos, and asked if her grandfather was a famous scholar. Sistine said that she wanted to fulfill his wish. Although she wasn't sure if she could, Celica encouraged her with a few words and told her to do her best before leaving. After that, Celica entered one of the rooms inside the library and approached a painting that looked like a map of the place, intending to go to the underground time labyrinth. Meanwhile, Sistine found Glenn in the library and was surprised to see him there, as that place did not suit her personality. Glenn explained that he wanted to thank her for saving him from death that day. Sistine blushed as she remembered the moment she performed first aid on him. When Rel and Rumia joined them, Rumia thought that Glenn had made Sistine cry, which made Rel furious. She summoned her sword to attack Glenn. Glenn tried to explain what had happened, but Rel began chasing him with her weapon, and he fled cowardly until he was kicked out of the library. Outside, he was almost run over by a carriage, but the owner used wind magic to pull him out of the way of the horses. The man got out of the carriage and found Sistine, who was surprised by his presence. Glenn asked who he was, and the man introduced himself as Professor Liam Cletus, who had been invited by the academy as a temporary teacher, as well as Sistine's fiancé. Everyone was shocked to learn that Sistine was engaged. Sistine then questioned Liam about it, and he remembered that they had both promised to get married when they were children. Glenn approached and said that dating Sistine was like digging your own grave. Liam asked him not to insult his future wife. Sistine tried to ease the situation by saying that Glenn was just joking. Liam then realized that this was the famous Glenn, the teacher he had heard about before. Glenn was surprised that he was already known to Liam, who said that he had heard comments about him at Cletus Academy, where he taught, and that they considered him a rare teacher because of his teaching method. Meanwhile, in the principal's office, Mr. Harry was celebrating the fact that a prestigious teacher like Leo's had come to answer the school's call to replace the head teacher who was on medical leave. Celica questioned why the academy would hire someone of his caliber and thought it was odd that he had been chosen. Harry asked her if she was worried that Leo's would overshadow her student, Glenn. In the courtyard, Leo's declared his love for Sistine in front of the students, which embarrassed her. Glenn sarcastically said that Leo's had too strange taste to fall in love with her, and suggested that he be invited to the wedding. Sistine, irritated, blew him away with a gust of wind. Later, Leo's finished teaching Glenn's class and was applauded. Ralph slept on Sistine's shoulder. Glenn watched everything from the back of the room and admired the way Leo's had taught the theory of physical strength, making it easier for the students to understand, even though it was advanced content for that level. Rumia turned to Glenn and commented that she now understood why he had told them to reflect on the true meaning of strength and to use magic consciously. Glenn replied that, in fact, he was just jealous because Leo's had proven to be a better teacher than he had expected. After that, Leo's approached Sistine and asked her honest opinion about the class, since she was known for making teachers cry in her first classes. When Sistine said that the class had been excellent, Leo's felt that he had overcome the first obstacle to becoming a worthy husband to her. He invited her for a walk in the academy's garden, saying that he wanted to talk about something. As the two walked, Glenn, Rumia, and Rel watched them from afar. Glenn wondered why Rumia wanted him to spy on a romantic moment so badly. During the walk, Leo's asked if walking together reminded Sistine of the past and said that he believed their relationship would grow stronger with time. He then confessed and proposed to Sistine. Glenn reacted with excitement. While Rumia felt that something was wrong, Sistine refused the proposal. Leo's asked why, and Sistine explained that she had promised her grandfather that one day she would discover the secret of the Sky Castle, and, in order to do so, she needed to study magic diligently. Leo's laughed at the idea, saying that it was fantasy, and stated that her grandfather would have made history in magic if he hadn't wasted his life searching for the past. Instead, he asked Sistine to support him in his specialty. Sistine refused, saying that she also had dreams of her own and would not give up on them. Leo stated that he did not want to see her waste her life. At that moment, Glenn emerged from behind the bushes and accused him of lying, stating that each person should follow their own path. Leo said that it was none of his business, but was surprised when Sistine said that she meant yes, since she and Glenn were lovers and had promised to share their future together. Glenn was surprised by the statement, but he understood the lie and decided to play along to provoke Leo's even more. Leo's refused to believe it, saying that it was impossible for Sistine to love someone so useless, and swore that he would make Glenn regret it. Glenn took off his gloves and threw them at Leo's, challenging him to a duel. Leo's accepted, saying that they would discuss the place and time later, and left the room. Afterwards, Glenn went to the classroom and told the students what had happened. He said that he was thinking of turning the fake relationship with Sistine into something real, so that he could marry a rich girl and live a life of luxury without having to work. He asked them to train hard to compete with Leo's class and win. He promised not to forget them when he was rich. That night, Glenn went to the bar to meet Albert. When he told the story, Albert called him a scoundrel for fighting over a girl for money even though he didn't love her. Glenn ignored the comment, believing that it would be worth it if he could stop working. He then asked why Albert wanted to talk. Albert revealed that he had information about the smuggling of angel dust within the Empire. Glenn was shocked, as he thought that the manufacturing method had been destroyed the previous year. Before he could say anything else, Albert refused to investigate the case and asked Glenn to stay out of it as well, questioning the meaning of Sarah's death if that substance still existed. Glenn replied that he did not want that tragedy to happen again, and that he still saw Sarah and Sistine in his thoughts. After leaving the bar, Glenn walked the streets at night, remembering Sarah, how she admired his dream of becoming a justice mage, and that perhaps he wanted to fulfill that dream as well. He almost said that he would protect her, but decided against it. Meanwhile, Leos was sitting in a carriage with a mysterious person, who said that everything had gone as planned after Glenn challenged him, and asked him to defeat Glenn for him. On the day of the long-awaited duel between Glenn and Leos, Harry acted as supervisor and instructed the students to follow the teacher's instructions. The duel would last 3 hours and the winning team would be the one that took the opponent's territory. Harry was furious that Glenn used the class to fight over a girl and asked Leos to teach him a lesson. The referee announced the start of the battle. As soon as the teams got into position, Leos attacked Glenn's team directly, eliminating 2 students. Leo's team used a strategy based on trios, spreading out over large areas to control the fight. All the teachers watched closely and believed that Leos would win. The teams exchanged spells, but Glenn's team gained the advantage in hand-to-hand combat. The teachers were surprised to see that Glenn had divided his students into pairs, which they considered an affront to the Academy's tradition. Harry explained that Glenn would use any method to win. Leos ordered his team to retreat and switch to ranged attacks. However, part of his team was facing Rel alone, who seemed invincible, so he ordered everyone to head to the forest, where he would use a special tactic to win once and for all. However, when they arrived at the entrance, they found Glenn laughing arrogantly and blocking their way. He taunted them and ran into the forest. Leo's students, excited, followed Glenn, but discovered that he had set traps to take them down and taunted them with each elimination. After 3 hours, neither team had managed to complete the objective, and Harry declared a draw. Glenn praised his team for their good performance. Leo's, on the other hand, scolded his for not following his orders. Glenn approached him and told him that he was dealing with the students the wrong way, and that the team's failure was the leader's fault. Leo's removed his glove and challenged Glenn to another duel, saying that he would only give up Sistine if he could convince her to marry him and give up her search for the Sky Castle. Glenn accepted the challenge, but Sistine interrupted them, saying that it was not an object for the 2 of them to duel over. She scolded Glenn for using dirty tricks. Glenn then told Leos that they would fight the next morning in the back of the academy in a one-on-one duel. Sistine approached him, slapped him across the face, told him that she hated him, and stormed off. Later, on the way back, Sistine talked to Rumia about Glenn and wondered how he could see her as a means to get rich. Rumia said that Glenn was not that kind of person, and that there must be a reason behind the fight against Leos. She decided to talk to Glenn and tell him about the bad feeling she had towards Leos, the same one she had felt in the past with Parks. Meanwhile, Albert was with members of the Imperial Army in front of the body of a person addicted to angel dust. He reported that this was the 5th case they had received in a short time. Leos returned angry with Glenn, believing that he was only a third-rate mage and that he could never be a worthy opponent. He vowed to defeat him in order to win Sistine, give his family the upper hand over hers, and secure his position as the future family leader. That night, Glenn thought that he had to defeat Leos at all costs, as he had no intention of losing. Sistine appeared after hearing him talking to himself and asked why he had challenged Leos to a duel. Glenn pretended that he had done it so that he would become rich and never have to work again. When Sistine didn't answer, he commented that she looked a lot like Sarah and then told her his past story about his love for magic and his desire to become a justice mage. He confessed that he was afraid of the reality of blood magic and hated it, but Sarah was the only reason he still followed his dream. When Sarah died in his arms during a mission, he decided to give up magic, became unemployed, and isolated himself at home. Glenn said he didn't know exactly why he wanted to fight Leos. Maybe because he saw Sistine working so hard for her dream, or because he wanted to make up for his guilt with Sarah by protecting Sistine's dreams. Sistine realized that he was acting based on personal feelings. She then commented that she felt insignificant in front of her grandfather and that the more she delved into magic, the more she lost faith. She looked at Glenn and said that there was someone supporting her dream because of personal emotions, so she should keep fighting. Glenn realized even more how much Sistine resembled Sarah. Leos interrupted the conversation and called Glenn a coward for using his sad story to gain Sistine's sympathy. Leos stated that he knew what Glenn had done in the Imperial Army as a researcher of military magic. Glenn warned him to get out of there and say nothing more. Leos said that Glenn had no right to live in the light with blood-stained hands. Glenn replied that if he kept talking, they wouldn't have to wait until the next day to fight. Leos asked Glenn to resume his former position in the special forces of the Imperial Magic Army's Zero Division. Glenn decided to attack him and used Arcana the Trickster to break his magic. However, he was surprised to see that Leos could also fight in the Imperial Army style. Leos knocked him down and revealed that he could summon Talpa creatures. He conjured winged swords and began attacking Glenn, who was unable to dodge or block. Arcana the Trickster did not work against Leos because he used amplified imagination instead of traditional spells. Leos approached and asked Glenn to take the next day's fight seriously. Glenn got up and left without saying anything. When Sistine tried to follow him, Leos grabbed her hand and asked her to marry him again. He told her that she had no right to refuse and threatened her with revealing Rumia's true identity, since there were many organizations interested in using her for experiments. The next day, word spread among the students that Sistine had accepted Leo's proposal and that the wedding would take place in a week. Many were disturbed by Glenn's absence from both the battle and the academy since then. When Sistine entered the classroom, her classmates asked her about the truth of her marriage to Leos and her dream of becoming an archaeologist. Sistine replied that it was all just a dream. Leos appeared and took her to a meeting about the marriage, surprising everyone. After the two left, Rel told Rumia that she believed Leos was the enemy and wanted to join her in facing him. Rumia stopped her and told her that she had revealed everything to Glenn, who replied that he would take care of the problem before disappearing. A week later, Rumia and Rel were waiting for Sistine outside the classroom and admiring the beauty of her wedding dress. When Rumia tried to ask her something, Sistine sent them to the ballroom and stayed alone, crying after closing the door. The ceremony began and Sistine agreed to marry Leos in front of everyone. However, before the kiss, Glenn invaded the hall and opposed the wedding, throwing tear gas, taking Sistine in his arms and fleeing the place. After they distanced themselves, Sistine stated that she needed to marry Leos. Glenn said that he knew about the threat regarding Rumia's identity. She asked where he had been all this time, and he replied that he needed to think of a way to bring her back and defeat Leos, so he decided to lure him to a place where he would have an advantage. Glenn said that she believed that Leos loved her so much that he would do crazy things, such as threatening her or forcing her to marry him. Sistine said that she realized that day that Leos did not love her, as he showed himself to be a cold and cruel person. At that moment, the two were interrupted by a group of people under the influence of the drug angel Dust, armed with axes and other weapons. Some of them invaded the room where Rel was. As she prepared to attack, she was surprised by Albert and the rest of the army of magicians, who asked her to help the students escape while they took care of the addicts. Glenn drew his weapon and stood in front of the attackers, asking Sistine to run away. Sistine refused to run away and decided to fight alongside him. She was surprised to see that some of them could jump great distances. Glenn faced them directly, took Sistine's hand, and both ran through alleys while he thought that Leos had sent the attackers. He remembered Sarah's death in a similar situation and vowed not to let it happen again. He attacked anyone who came near her. After defeating his enemies, Glenn approached Sistine, but she pushed his hand away and asked not to be touched. He asked her if she was afraid of him, but Leos appeared, applauding and praising Glenn's skill. Leos introduced himself as Gades Louvain, the former number 11, executioner of the Imperial Magic Army. When Sistine asked about Leos, Gades revealed that he had given him drugs to do his bidding, but Leos could not resist the dose and died. Glenn asked Sistine to stay away. Gades agreed, but threatened to kill her if she interfered in the fight. After Sistine left, Glenn understood that Gades had set up the whole thing to lure him into a battle, pretending to dispense justice, when in reality he wanted to eliminate all the powerful magicians and important figures of the Empire. Gades explained that this time, everything would go according to plan, and that by obtaining the Akashic records, he would have the power to rule the foundations of the world, to apply his justice against evil, and not allow them to defeat him as had happened in the past. Gades summoned ghostly creatures and threw them at Glenn, who destroyed them with gunfire. He hid behind a wall and appeared unexpectedly trying to hit him with a bullet, but Gaddes dodged it. Glenn used ice magic, but Gaddes countered it with fire magic. At the last moment, Glenn took advantage of the distraction to attack him with magic sticks, but Gaddes caught them with his fingers and wounded him in the arm by means of a ghost creature. Gaddes promised Glenn a quick death and asked him to say hello to Sarah. Before delivering the final blow, Gaddes was surprised by a gust of wind that blew him away. Glenn saw Sistine standing before him. He told him that this was not her place, but she replied that she had come back to take him back with her because she could not bear to lose him. Gaddes emerged from the rubble and Glenn took off his cloak, asking Sistine to fight by his side and promising to defeat him so that she could return safely. Sistine asked him to promise that they would return together to the others. They advanced on Gaddes, who, enraged, summoned several Talpa, but Glenn and Sistine defeated them with their combined abilities. As they approached, Sistine used the wind to propel Glenn, who jumped and punched Gaddes in the face, crushing him against the wall. Gaddes, realizing the strength of the duo and that he had underestimated Sistine, summoned the incarnation of Lady Justice to defeat them once and for all, but he was surprised to see Sistine's magic penetrate the entity. Glenn took advantage and delivered the final blow, which pinned Gaddes to the pillars of the wall before he fell motionless. Glenn approached, and Gaddes stated that he had only won thanks to Sistine. When Glenn turned to her, he saw that she was exhausted, without spiritual energy. Gaddes, even defeated, was still able to control Justia and declared that the Empire needed to be destroyed, as it had been founded with evil intentions. He promised to face him again and disappeared. After confirming that Gaddes had left, Glenn carried Sistine on his back to take her back to the group.